What if the most important piece of energy infrastructure in an entire country wasn't a refinery, an oil field, or even a pipeline? What if it was the single export terminal connecting that country's energy industry to the global economy? Because in modern geopolitics, producing oil is only half the equation. Unless that oil can reach international buyers, it generates little economic value. That distinction has shaped military planning for decades, and it explains why energy terminals have become some of the most strategically significant pieces of infrastructure in the world. If you've been following tensions in the Persian Gulf, you've probably heard headlines about shipping disruptions, military deployments, and rising oil prices. But behind those headlines lies a much larger strategic question. What happens if the infrastructure connecting a major energy producer to global markets is seriously disrupted? The answer reaches far beyond one country. It affects insurance markets, global shipping, commodity prices, and the stability of supply chains stretching from Asia to Europe. To understand why analysts pay so much attention to Karg Island, we first need to understand its role within Iran's energy system. Publicly available energy assessments have long identified Karg as Iran's principal crude oil export terminal. For decades, a substantial share of the country's internationally traded crude has been loaded there before being transported through the Persian Gulf to overseas buyers. That does not mean every barrel depends on a single location, but it does illustrate how concentrated export infrastructure can become when geography, investment, and decades of development converge around one facility. This concentration creates both efficiency and vulnerability. Large export terminals are designed to handle enormous volumes of crude. They connect pipelines from multiple producing regions, provide extensive storage capacity, and allow very large crude carriers to load efficiently. Replacing that capability is neither quick nor inexpensive. Even when alternative terminals exist, they often operate at much smaller scales or serve different offshore fields and logistics networks. That is why energy specialists often describe major export terminals as critical nodes rather than ordinary industrial facilities. The importance of these facilities is not a new discovery. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, attacks on oil infrastructure demonstrated how vulnerable energy exports could become during prolonged conflict. Both sides learned that striking export facilities could generate economic pressure far beyond the immediate battlefield. Those historical experiences helped shape decades of investment in coastal defenses, hardened infrastructure, and contingency planning designed to reduce future vulnerability. Fast forward to today, and the strategic environment has become even more complex. Modern precision weapons, satellite surveillance, cyber capabilities, and long-range intelligence have transformed how military planners evaluate critical infrastructure. At the same time, global energy markets have become more interconnected than ever before. A disruption affecting one major exporter can influence fuel prices thousands of miles away within days, sometimes within hours. That is why recent regional tensions have drawn such intense international attention. Public reporting has documented repeated concerns over shipping security in the Persian Gulf, military deployments by multiple countries, and diplomatic efforts aimed at preventing further escalation. Energy analysts have repeatedly warned that prolonged disruption in the region could tighten global supply, increase transportation costs, and raise insurance premiums for commercial shipping. It is important to distinguish between verified facts and speculation. Publicly available satellite imagery, official government statements, and commercial shipping data can confirm certain developments, such as increased naval activity, changes in shipping routes, or fluctuations in export volumes. However, claims regarding the exact effectiveness of military operations, the condition of specific facilities, or long-term damage assessments often remain difficult to verify independently while conflicts continue. Responsible analysis therefore focuses less on dramatic headlines and more on the strategic implications that can be supported by available evidence. From a military perspective, targeting infrastructure is fundamentally different from targeting armed forces. Destroying equipment may produce immediate tactical effects. Disrupting logistics can generate much broader strategic consequences. Military planners have long recognized that fuel storage, transportation hubs, communications networks, ports, and export terminals often determine how effectively a country can sustain prolonged operations. Modern conflict increasingly revolves around these systems rather than conventional battlefield engagements alone. For governments dependent on energy exports, maintaining uninterrupted access to international markets becomes a national security priority. Oil revenues influence government budgets, industrial investment, currency stability, and foreign trade. When exports decline significantly, pressure can spread across the wider economy through reduced revenue, tighter financial conditions, and increased uncertainty. None of these outcomes happen instantly. but together they can reshape political and economic decision-making over time. This broader perspective helps explain why the Persian Gulf remains one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. A large share of internationally traded energy passes through relatively narrow maritime corridors where commercial shipping, naval operations, and regional politics intersect every day. Ensuring freedom of navigation has therefore become a central objective for numerous governments, while regional actors continue seeking ways to strengthen their own security and influence. Perhaps the most important point is this: the real story is not simply whether one facility is damaged or one shipment is delayed. The larger story is how modern warfare increasingly targets systems instead of individual military units. Infrastructure, logistics, financial resilience, maritime transportation, and energy networks now occupy the center of strategic competition. Every government understands that controlling territory matters. Increasingly, however, controlling the systems that keep an economy functioning may matter even more. And that is why energy infrastructure has become one of the defining strategic assets of the 21st century. It connects economics with military power, diplomacy with logistics, and regional conflict with global markets. The events unfolding in the Gulf are therefore not only regional developments. They are reminders that in today's interconnected world, a disruption affecting one critical node can send consequences across the entire international system. For decades, military planners around the world have understood a simple reality. Destroying a country's oil production is difficult. Destroying its ability to export that oil can be even more consequential. Wells can continue producing. Storage tanks can be repaired. Pipelines can eventually be replaced. But if the infrastructure connecting an energy system to global markets is disabled, the economic consequences can spread far beyond the battlefield. That is why energy terminals have always occupied a unique position in modern warfare. They are not merely industrial facilities. They are strategic gateways. Every barrel that reaches international markets must pass through a chain of infrastructure that includes pipelines, storage systems, loading facilities, navigation channels, and shipping networks. Interrupt any critical point in that chain, and the effects ripple through the entire economy. Throughout history, governments facing military pressure have often discovered that rebuilding physical infrastructure is only one part of the challenge. Restoring investor confidence, rebuilding shipping insurance, repairing logistics networks, and convincing commercial operators that routes are once again safe often takes far longer than repairing concrete and steel. Modern energy markets run on confidence almost as much as they run on crude oil. And this is why many analysts argue that infrastructure has become one of the decisive battlefields of 21st century conflict. Military campaigns are no longer judged solely by territory gained or enemy equipment destroyed. Increasingly, they are measured by how effectively they disrupt the systems that allow an opponent's economy to function. For Iran, that broader economic picture has always mattered. While exports remain one of the country's primary sources of hard currency, international sanctions have already limited many financial options, making energy exports even more strategically important. Every interruption to export capacity, therefore, carries consequences that extend well beyond the petroleum sector itself. Revenue from energy exports affects government budgets, infrastructure spending, industrial imports, currency stability, and the state's ability to finance both domestic priorities and regional activities. When energy income falls sharply, pressure begins appearing across multiple sectors simultaneously. Inflation becomes harder to control. Currency markets become more volatile. Investment slows. Government spending faces increasing constraints. This is why military analysts frequently describe energy infrastructure as a force multiplier. One successful disruption can create effects that extend far beyond the immediate physical damage. At the same time, history also suggests caution. Critical infrastructure has often proven remarkably resilient. Countries have repeatedly demonstrated the ability to repair facilities under difficult conditions, develop alternative export routes, or gradually adapt their economies to prolonged disruption. Strategic pressure rarely produces immediate political outcomes. Instead, it usually begins a long process of economic adjustment whose final destination remains uncertain. That uncertainty is exactly what makes modern strategic competition so difficult to predict. Markets respond not only to what has happened, but to what investors believe might happen next. Insurance companies calculate risk. Shipping firms evaluate alternative routes. Energy traders estimate future supply. Governments prepare contingency plans. Sometimes those expectations influence prices more powerfully than physical supply itself. This interaction between military operations and economic psychology has become one of the defining characteristics of contemporary conflict. Every missile strike is followed by financial analysis. Every diplomatic statement is evaluated by commodity markets. Every military deployment becomes part of a much larger calculation involving investment, trade, and global supply chains. Seen from this perspective, the Persian Gulf is far more than a regional waterway. It is one of the central arteries of the global economy. Even temporary disruptions there immediately attract worldwide attention because so many nations depend upon uninterrupted maritime commerce. That explains why freedom of navigation has remained a consistent priority for numerous naval powers for decades. It also explains why every confrontation in the region receives such close international scrutiny. But perhaps the most important lesson extends beyond any single country. Modern wars increasingly target systems rather than armies alone. Logistics, communications, financial networks, energy infrastructure, satellite systems, cyber networks. These interconnected systems determine whether a modern state can continue functioning under pressure. Military power today is measured not simply by how effectively a nation destroys enemy forces, but by how effectively it protects its own critical infrastructure while disrupting that of its opponent. That represents a significant evolution in strategic thinking. Traditional warfare emphasized territorial control. Modern strategic competition increasingly emphasizes systemic resilience. Who can keep ports operating? Who can maintain supply chains? Who can protect energy exports? Who can sustain industrial production? Who can preserve investor confidence? Those questions may ultimately matter as much as any battlefield victory. For policymakers, this creates an uncomfortable dilemma. Escalation can impose enormous costs. Restraint can sometimes encourage further pressure. Every decision carries economic consequences that extend well beyond military planning. That is why governments increasingly rely upon a combination of military capability, diplomatic negotiation, economic sanctions, and alliance coordination rather than any single instrument of national power. No single tool solves problems at this scale. Instead, modern strategy becomes an exercise in balancing pressure against stability. Looking ahead, the future of Gulf security will almost certainly depend less on individual military engagements than on whether regional actors can establish durable mechanisms for protecting maritime commerce while reducing the incentives for repeated escalation. Energy markets have repeatedly demonstrated remarkable adaptability. New pipelines are built. Alternative suppliers emerge. Strategic reserves provide temporary relief. Technology improves efficiency. But geography cannot be rewritten. The Persian Gulf will remain one of the world's most important energy corridors for years to come. That means every development there will continue carrying global consequences. Perhaps that is the biggest takeaway. The real story is not about one military operation. It is about the growing realization that modern conflicts are increasingly fought through infrastructure, logistics, economics, and strategic endurance rather than through battlefield victories alone. Because in today's world, the most decisive target may no longer be the army itself. It may be the network that allows the entire nation to keep functioning. And that is the strategic transformation policymakers around the world are now being forced to confront.